Croeso bawb i'r cyfarfod llawn.
Welcome all to this plenary session. Before we begin, I want to set out a few points. A plenary meeting held by video conference in accordance with the standing orders of the Welsh Parliament constitutes Senedd proceedings for the purposes of the Government of Wales Act 2006. Some provisions of Standing Order 34 will apply for today's plenary meeting, and these are set out on your agenda. And I would remind members that standing orders relating to order in plenary apply for this meeting, as to the time limits on questions that will be applied to this meeting. So the first item on our agenda this morning is questions to the First Minister, and the first question is from Caroline Jones.
Caroline, if you can wait for your microphone to be unmuted. You need to unmute your microphone, Caroline.
Diolch, Lewis. What steps is the Welsh Government taking to ensure Wales is equipped to deal with future pandemics?
Diolch, Chloe. Thank the member for that question. The Welsh Government leads a set of local resilience arrangements and participates in UK-wide networks, which together focus on public protection and pandemic preparedness.
Thank you, First Minister. I'm sure you will agree that we were woefully unprepared for COVID-19. Despite SARS and MERS, our pandemic planning was still based upon an outbreak of influenza. However, our planning still neglected to prioritise testing capacity. This current pandemic has shown that those countries that had testing capacity early on made it through the initial outbreak relatively unscathed. Leading virologists have warned that other unknown viruses could threaten us in future as climate change and population growth force humans into closer contact with wildlife. As with this coronavirus, we have to test and isolate the infected, and we can't afford to quarantine everyone. First Minister, what plans does your government have to ensure Wales has sufficient lab capacity to conduct tens of thousands of reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction tests on a daily basis?
So I thank Caroline Jones for that question, and I agree with what she said about the changing nature of the threats that we see on a global scale and the need for us to be alert to them. It is why we have our own Wales response plan. It's why we work through our local resilience forums, and then that we are linked into the UK structures as well. The Four Nations CMO meetings, the fact that emergency planning leads meet as a group across the Four Nations, all of those things mean that we are playing our part in the efforts that are needed across the United Kingdom to be well prepared for the future. And to put those things in place that will make us resilient for any future events of this sort that we may need to face.
Thank you. Angela Burns.
Good morning, Clauth. Good morning, First Minister. Picking up on Caroline's point, of course, none of us were prepared for this pandemic, and I think that we as a world have learnt some very significant lessons about what happens when you impinge on nature and how we can all respond. And of course, the point that Caroline Jones has raised about the testing capacity is vitally important. And, I know that you acknowledge that. But whilst we may have been caught on the hop in terms of the general pandemic, we have had now months to start getting our testing regime in place and working. Yet figures produced yesterday showed that little over a fifth of the daily capacity of testing capacity in Wales has been utilised. And for the 7th week in a row, there was a slowdown on testing for healthcare workers. Additionally, we are still waiting 48, sometimes 72 hours for tests come back. And the point made before, which I think we all agree, is that we need to get people back into the workplace, back out into their real lives as soon as possible, if they're self-isolating because there are people around them or they have symptoms. So First Minister, what are you going to be able to do to ensure that we have a comprehensive and responsive testing regime that can move forward, that can deliver for Wales? How will you change things to improve it? And how will you ensure that this testing regime is fit for any purpose that might be thrown with us with any other pandemics that may come our way?
So I will thank Angela Burns for that. Well, we have a comprehensive testing regime in place in Wales. We have more tests available today than at any time previously. We've just under 15,000 tests available in Wales on every day. And the fact that sometimes fewer people are being tested simply means there are fewer people needing a test. It's not our ambition simply to test people who don't need testing. And there are fewer sometimes healthcare workers needing testing. That's why the numbers are down. There are fewer people being tested in care homes, but that's because we have a regime of testing everybody every week who work in care homes. And in terms of the way in which tests are turned round, we need to improve the proportion of tests that are completed within 24 hours. But the number of tests that are turned around within 24 hours is higher than it's been at any point in the pandemic. That's because more tests are being carried out. So when the proportion of tests completed within 24 hours was at its highest, we completed between 200 and 300 a day within 24 hours. Now when the proportion is lower, we're carrying out 1,700 a day within 24 hours because there are far more tests being carried out. And in North Wales, in the two pandemics, we have been turning around the huge majority of tests within 24 hours. And I think that our TTP system has demonstrated that it's been able to mobilize and to provide the service that is needed in those contexts. And I think that's something that we ought to be glad about. And I think we ought to give a bit of credit to those people who work so hard to make sure that those arrangements are in place and working effectively.
Rhiannon Passmore.
Diolch, Llywyd. First Minister, it is being reported today that the US government has secured virtually all the stocks of one of the two drugs shown to currently help COVID-19 patients. The White House said that it had bought up more than 500,000 courses of remdesivir, an antiviral which trials suggest helps some patients spend less time in hospital. And this includes all of the supplies that will be manufactured this month as well, 90% of those due in August and September. Such unilateral deals obviously have implications for patients in Islam and across Wales. So what assessment has the Welsh Government made of the effective supply of medicines in this global pandemic?
Well, thank you, Rhiannon Passmore, for that important question. She's right to point to the challenges that there are in securing effective supplies of medicines. There is increased demand for medicines around the globe, but there has been falling production capacity, because India and China, where many medicines are produced, have had to stand back from production because of the impact of coronavirus in their own countries. Now, the continuity of supply of medicines is a reserved matter. It isn't a matter that is devolved to Wales, but we have been working hard with the other 4 nations to make sure that there are plans in place to understand demand, to allocate available stock, to increase supply where required. We face, as I know Rhiannon Passmore will know, the additional difficulty of leaving the European Union without a proper deal. 90% of these medicines come into the United Kingdom across the short strait between Calais and Dover. If there were disruption to those supplies, the UK government previously planned to rely on air freight, but air freight isn't moving in the COVID crisis. So there are real issues arising from coronavirus, which we are all grappling with, but there are avoidable difficulties which are looming on the horizon as well. And as the body responsible for continuity of supply of medicines, it's really incumbent on the UK government not to add to the difficulties we are already facing and the challenges which coronavirus itself has produced.
Question 2, Jack Sargent.
Question 2, Jack Sargent.
Diolch, Llywyd. Will the First Minister make a statement on what the Welsh Government is doing to support the aviation sector in Wales?
Well, Llywyd, following the overnight news about Airbus, I want to be absolutely clear that the Welsh Government will do all we can to support the company and its workforce in these very difficult times. But the global nature of the current crisis in aviation means that local solutions will not be sufficient by themselves to ensure the future of this important strategic industry. and we continue to work with the UK government to press them to provide targeted assistance for the aviation sector.
Thank you for that, First Minister, and I appreciate the continued support of the Welsh Government, but I must say I am absolutely furious and frankly upset. For months now, I have been telling the UK Government that they must intervene to support jobs in the aviation and aerospace sector, and honestly, I've heard nothing back. This is an industry that had full order books. This is not the fault of the company, nor its workforce. When the government needed ventilators a few months ago, this workforce stepped up to the plate and produced 10,000 ventilators. The UK government has a choice, First Minister. They bent again. First Minister, will you speak directly with Boris Johnson and tell him that he must act now?
Well, so I thank Jack Sargent for that and for his long-standing commitment to Airbus and to its workforce. When I last visited there on the 30th of January, it was with Jack, and we were there to celebrate Apprenticeship Week, and we met a fantastic group of very talented, very bright, very committed young people looking to a successful future in an industry which at that point had a very successful future in front of it. What we have to do, working together with the UK government, is to find a way of helping this industry to bridge between the difficulties it faces today and the successful future that is still there for it, provided we can help it through the difficult couple of years ahead. And there are many actions that can be taken, things we will do to continue to support apprenticeships, to develop skills of the workforce, to invest in research and development. And then there is the part the UK government has to play. Our colleague Ken Skate spoke yesterday with ministers in Bays. He was talking to the Secretary of State at Bays on Friday of this week. Of course, I will talk to any minister in the UK government to press the case for the sorts of sector-specific help which is now needed, as the French government has done, as the German government has done, to demonstrate that the world-leading aviation sector that we have in Wales and in the United Kingdom goes on being supported by governments here at all levels.
Mark Isherwood. Mark
Thank you.
Isherwood.
I'm unmuted. Thank you. Yes. I received a briefing alongside Welsh Conservative MPs in North East Wales from Airbus last night, and we note that tomorrow is when the announcements are likely to have detail added to them, and we hope that it is going to be dealt with without compulsory redundancies. But I hope to touch on that later in a topical question. On the 9th of April, Airbus announced it was cutting production because of new rules on distancing, and said that reducing temporary production and support labour supplied by Guidant Global. On the 28th of April, Guidant Global furloughed their almost 500 workforce at Airbus and served them with a risk of redundancy notice. And yesterday, Airbus announced that the job losses were in addition to reductions of more than 700 temps and subcontractors at UK commercial sites. But in addition to the work the Welsh Government will be doing directly and with the UK Government for Airbus, what support have you been providing or will you be providing for those Guidant Global employees?
Well, Llywydd, the member makes an important point that the difficulties in the aviation sector go beyond Airbus, go beyond the direct employees of Airbus, but go into the supply chain as well. 150 firms, we think, with 1,500 additional jobs that rely on Airbus as part of their business futures. So the response that the Welsh Government will make, including bringing together in a summit all those local players and Welsh national players who have a part to play in responding to the difficulties that Airbus itself faces and the knock-on effects that that has for others in the supply chain more broadly, will be a way in which we will look to design together the sort of response which supports this sector because it has a successful future. We need to get it through the next couple of years, and we need to do that without losing really experienced and very skilled people who this company will need again when order books pick up and the global economy recovers. And our efforts will be very much directed at that impact in the round that we will see across the economy of North East Wales.
Helen Mary Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd, and I thank the First Minister for his answers, and I'm sure that we are all thinking of the staff members and their families who are living through this very uncertain time. Fully understand, of course, the points the First Minister makes about the vital role of the UK government, but we may find ourselves in a situation where there will be some Airbus jobs that will be lost, and obviously our priority must be ensuring minimising the number of those jobs that are lost here in Wales, and so to a certain extent there's an element of competition there. I wonder, the First Minister mentions the summit, and that is obviously very welcome. And I wonder what discussions the Welsh Government has had or will have with Airbus about what steps we might be able to take to give the Welsh workforce the best possible advantage. Are there, for example, some things that need to be done in the field of infrastructure, whether that be digital infrastructure, practical infrastructure, that could be offered as not an immediate solution, but as a short-term solution to make it more attractive for Airbus to stay here and keep the work here if there is some inevitable loss, not that we would wish, of course, any workers to lose their jobs anywhere.
Well, thank you, Mary Jones, for that. She's absolutely right. Our thoughts today must be focused on those people whose futures are now so uncertain. I had a meeting at 10 o'clock this morning with Unite, the union who represents the bulk of workers at Broughton, and there were members of Broughton staff involved in that call. And it's a very sober and shocked atmosphere at the plant this morning. And Helen Mary Jones is right as well, that the plant at Broughton has always had to compete with other Airbus sites elsewhere in Europe. And it's because of the joint working with a trade union that the management there will tell you that, it is at the leading edge of production, of efficiency, of health and safety, all the things that the company values. Broughton has been at a leading edge. And that's partly because of the help that they've had from the Welsh Government and others. Our investment in the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre was absolutely designed to give Broughton an edge in attracting the wing of the future research to North Wales. And we will go on doing that. If there are things that we can do that will help Broughton persuade Airbus globally to bring more work to North Wales, where they have this dedicated, skilled and very committed workforce, then of course we will do that as we have in the past and will intensify whatever efforts we can to assist them in that way.
Cwestiynau nawr gan arweinwyr y pleidiau.
Questions now from the party leaders. Leader of Plaid Cymru, Adam Price.
First Minister, this week we've seen some encouraging news from Scotland with the number of confirmed COVID-19 deaths there falling to 3 in total over the last 5 days. And Professor Devi Sridhar predicting that Scotland could be practically COVID-free in terms of non-imported cases by the end of the summer. In England, by way of contrast, it's been reported that the chief medical officer there expects to see the level of new daily infections remaining at the current level of around 3,000 a day for the foreseeable future. First Minister, do you think that a COVID-free Wales, in the terms described, is a realistic aspiration in the near term? And is aiming for zero, in a sense, the surest way of avoiding a second spike?
Well, I'm pleased to say in response to Adam Price that many of the key indicators in Wales continue to head in the right direction as well, with death numbers falling, with hospital admissions falling, with numbers of patients in critical care falling again in the last week, for which we have complete figures. I of course, in one sense, aiming for a COVID-free Wales is, of course, what we would want to do. But I want to be realistic with people as well. We have a long and porous border, that it is difficult to regard Wales as an island for these purposes, and that our ability to make Wales COVID-free very much depends upon the efforts that are made across the United Kingdom in the same direction. We have heard, I know he has heard, stark warnings from the Chief Medical Officer that in the autumn, when the cold and the damp return, the conditions in which COVID may thrive will be with us again. So while aiming to have COVID at the lowest possible level that we can in Wales, we shouldn't think that that means that we're out of the woods and that there aren't other dangers in front of us in the rest of this calendar year.
Many countries have successfully suppressed the virus to near zero new cases. New Zealand is regarded as the world leader, but it's not alone. Greece, Slovenia, Austria, Norway have also suppressed the virus to the extent that restrictions there are now limited, new cases rare. And like Wales, those countries are not islands either. I take the First Minister's point, but would he like to see an elimination strategy adopted across the whole of the UK? And would he ask the Technical Advisory Cell to look at the experience specifically of those countries that have adopted an elimination strategy to see whether that could be adopted in full or in part in Wales?
So I was very happy to ask the Technical Advisory Group for their views on that. We already do get advice from them that draws on experience elsewhere in the world. When I was able to make an announcement on Monday about extended households here in Wales, it was very much informed by the New Zealand experience and things we have learnt from them. I think Adam Price points to some very interesting examples when he points, for example, to Norway and to Greece as places that have borders with other countries where the experience has been different. And in that sense, if there are things that we can learn from them that will help us on the journey to bear down on coronavirus to the maximum possible extent, I would be very keen that we learn those lessons here in Wales. And I'm very happy that we deploy the assistance we get through the Technical Advisory Group to give us whatever lessons they think can be learned from experiences in those places, and then to apply it to be of assistance to us here in Wales.
Even in those countries that have been successful in disease suppression, of course, the price of liberty from the virus, if you like, is eternal vigilance, particularly as regards new outbreaks. And we see possibly in Leicester as well, don't we, that the danger potentially of not having local intelligence turn quickly enough into local action. So drawing on recent experience in Wales as well, is the First Minister prepared to make a number of commitments to ensure a rapid turnaround between testing and results, particularly in relation to local outbreaks, to publishing local dashboards of indicators to identify local spikes? And finally, can you set out the circumstances and the practical means by which a local lockdown, if it became necessary, would be implemented in Wales?
Well, again, thank Adam Price for those questions. So in terms of how we would judge whether a local lockdown were necessary, then in the two examples, the live examples in North East and North West Wales, and in both those cases, the key test will be whether or not there is wider community transmission from the closed settings of the two factories where the outbreaks have taken place. The most recent evidence is encouraging, but I don't want to overstate that, because this week is a very important week in keeping on top of any evidence that transmission has moved from the factory setting and those most closely associated with it and into the wider community. If we have evidence of strong community spread, then that would be the indicator for us of need for further local measures. Now, you could argue, and I've seen people argue, that in Ynys Môn, for example, we already have a form of local lockdown. There are hundreds of people self-isolating because of the outbreak at Two Sisters, and the local authority took the decision quite early on not to reopen schools in Ynys Môn alongside the rest of Wales on Monday. So we already have some differentiated policy interventions happening because of that local outbreak. We are absolutely clear that, unlike in Leicester, when there seemed to be quite a lot of confusion as to whether the legal powers existed and to whom they belonged, we are very clear that in Wales, Welsh ministers have the powers through our regulations to take local action to reduce, if we had to, some of the freedoms we've been able to reintroduce in order to deal with local outbreaks. And we would certainly be prepared to do that were the need to be there. On the member's point about local dashboards, I'm very happy again to get some advice on that, to see whether that sort of information exists in a way that would be meaningful and reliable at a local level. And if it is, then the Welsh Government's policy throughout the coronavirus crisis has been to make as much information public as possible so people can understand their local contexts, and then to act in the way that Adam Price said, because it isn't governments that take the decisive actions in these areas. It is the actions of citizens being vigilant in the way that Adam Price described that in the end gives us the greatest defence.
With Ceidwadwyr Cymreig.
Leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Paul Davies.
First Minister, yesterday's news that Airbus is set to cut 1,700 jobs across the UK as it struggles with the effects of the coronavirus crisis is a devastating blow to workers in Broughton and indeed in North East Wales. And the Welsh Government rightly responded to say that it would use all of the levers at its disposal to support workers throughout this difficult time. As you said earlier, it's crucial now that intergovernmental work takes place immediately, and I hope that governments are working together at all levels to best support the workers in Broughton at this time. First Minister, you've already described what measures you're looking to take to support the company and its workers at Airbus, but this news will, as Mark Isherwood said earlier, also undoubtedly have an effect on the wider supply chain, which will include a number of local businesses. And so can you tell us what specific measures and schemes the Welsh Government is at the moment considering to ensure that the supply chain is as supported as it can be?
Well, I think I'd say to the member that very difficult as that news has been overnight, we can point to the way in which, with the UK government and with the local authority, we were able to respond to the decision of Ford to leave Bridgend with 1,300 jobs lost there directly. But the way in which the teams we put together and the structures that we introduced were very much focused on the supply chains in the automotive industry as well. So we have some very recent and practical experience of responding to difficulties of this sort. The key difference between Ford and Airbus is that the Ford decision was a decision to leave Wales altogether, whereas Airbus has a successful future in front of it, provided we can get it through the next difficult months ahead. And that will mean working with supply chains. The summit meeting that I mentioned in my earlier answer is one that will involve the wider economy of North East Wales and indeed the Mersey Alliance, because many people who work at Broughton live in Chester and across our border, and the impact on supply chains will be felt across that northeast, south, northeast, northwest economy. So we will work with all those local players and with the UK government in order to make sure that we have a comprehensive picture of the needs, that we co-design with people on the ground the sort of help that they will find most useful. We have some off the peg things that we do. You know, we've got some tried and tested ways in which we mobilize help, but we want to do more than that. We want to make sure that the help we offer will be the help that people locally tell us will be most useful to them. And working with them and having a summit will be a way of drawing all that together to make sure that the help that we are able to offer is calibrated to meet the specific needs and circumstances of that North East Wales economy.
I very much agree with you. It's vital that governments and parties are working together where they can to support workers at this time. And I'll do whatever I can to constructively work with you and colleagues in Westminster to ensure everything that can be done will be done to support those affected by this news. Now, sadly, it's not the only announcement regarding job losses in Wales recently, and given that unemployment in Wales doubled in the month of April, it's critical that support is in place for those who have lost their jobs as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Now is the time for the Welsh Government to be having discussions, of course, with business leaders and skills providers about developing packages to help support people across Wales who may not be able to retain their employment at the end of the furlough scheme because of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are families across Wales who are in an extremely vulnerable position, and given that there will be a degree of uncertainty in the job market for some time yet, it is important that families across Wales feel that support and advice is available. Therefore, can you tell us what assessment has the Welsh Government made of the impact of COVID-19 on employment across Wales, and what discussions has the Welsh Government had with business leaders and skills providers about how best to mitigate against any economic shocks as a result of COVID-19?
Well, thank the Leader of the Opposition both for what he said about playing a constructive part in the response to the position faced in Airbus and the wider North East Wales economy. The analysis that we have of the Welsh economy in the COVID context is that it's quite complex. He'll have heard, I'm sure, today the reports from Andy Haldane, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, that they think that the early signs are that a V-shaped recovery for many parts of the economy is underway. You know, a sharp downturn and a very sharp rebound. And we want to make sure that as much of the Welsh economy is able to recover as quickly as possible in that way. But there will be aspects of the Welsh economy where that will be more difficult. Companies and industries who are not able to resume activity as quickly as others. And there we are talking to the UK government particularly about the long-term arrangements from the job retention scheme, which I've always welcomed in Wales and always appreciated what the UK government has done, and understand that as industries get back to work, you can't go on offering a furlough scheme to places where people are back working full time. But in some sectors of the economy, we need a more specific, sector-specific furlough scheme that will go beyond the end of October. And that will offer comfort to those industries that they will still be able to sustain themselves through the difficult days of this calendar year and be there to resume activity next year when, as we all hope, things will be better. So we will mobilise the actions that we have in consultation with business leaders. I was with the head of the CPI in Wales last week, with the head of the FSB in Wales last week. Very helpful suggestions from the CBI about how we could work together in mitigating some of the impacts in the Welsh economy, and then we will need help from elsewhere to be able to do the job that we all need to do, focusing on jobs, relentlessly on jobs in our economy during the second half of this financial year.
Well, First Minister, as you know, my party have also brought forward proposals to establish a COVID recovery fund for those areas most affected economically, and I hope you'll constructively look at our proposals, which could make a real difference to people affected by the closures and the job losses at Airbus and indeed Laura Ashley. Now, in response to the latest ONS labour market statistics for Wales, the Learning and Work Institute Cymru were right to say that the picture now starting to emerge is that those areas that entered the crisis with the highest levels of unemployment have experienced some of the largest rises over the last 2 months. This just demonstrates that there were communities across Wales that were already struggling with levels of deprivation before the COVID-19 pandemic. And so a resilience package, which includes investment, support and opportunities, is needed more than ever. First Minister, given that the claimant count has nearly doubled and now stands at the highest level since August 1994, can you tell us what new thinking the Welsh Government is adopting to start tackling the picture described by the Learning and Work Institute Cymru. Could you also tell us what monitoring of programmes and funding is taking place to ensure economic funds are reaching those communities in most need and to identify any gaps in its support packages? And what is the Welsh Government doing to help build resilience in communities across Wales, particularly those already struggling before the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, Llywydd, the Economic Resilience Fund that the Welsh Government has drawn together has up until now been very much focused on simply assisting firms and individuals to cope with the impact of coronavirus. But we have already indicated that there will be a further phase of the ERF beyond phase 1 and 2, which we are currently operating, and phase 3 will be a recovery phase. And there will be many millions of pounds still in the fund that we will be able to use for recovery, and where there are good ideas as to how that money might most effectively be used, then of course we will be very pleased to draw on those ideas wherever they come from. And the fact that we have a recovery phase in our economy will be shaped by the work that Jeremy Miles has been leading to put together a recovery plan for us in Wales, drawing on the best people we can bring together inside Wales, but having people from outside Wales to make sure that we don't miss out on ideas that people are developing elsewhere, and to challenge us on our own thinking and make sure we are making the best possible fist of designing that recovery stage. We monitor what we do. If you want just one single example of that, in figures that the ONS produced only last week, I think it is over 30% of firms in Wales have benefited from assistance provided either by the UK government or by the Welsh Government in order to help them through the pandemic. It's 21% of firms in Scotland, it's 14% of firms in England. And those are ONS figures which demonstrate, I think, that the impact of the assistance we've been able to mobilise in Wales has been felt strongly in our economy, and we now want the same approach to be adopted with the same level of success in helping the Welsh economy into the recovery phase.
Rwy'n Plaid Brexit, Mark Reckless.
Brexit Party, Mark Reckless.
May I congratulate all the children who are back in school in Wales this week, even if it is part-time, and all those who have worked so hard to get them back, not least your Education Secretary, Kirsty Williams. I would have liked more children to have returned earlier, but I do not want to criticise the Welsh Government, cavil with what is happening versus what was promised, or make comparisons with England today. First Minister, whatever our own particular views or interests, shouldn't we all respect that it is you, your cabinet, and Kirsty Williams who are responsible and have the democratic mandate to decide when and how schools should turn? Can you confirm that, unlike the teaching unions, you must consider not only the interests of their members, including teacher safety and any now far lower risk of infection, but also the pressing need of many parents to get back to work, and still more the purpose of schools being to educate our children who have already lost too much of that right?
Well, thank the member for what he said about the efforts that have been made, and they have been made in the way that we try to do things in Wales, in that social partnership way, by bringing teacher unions, non-teacher unions, the local education authorities and the Welsh Government around the table together to craft a way ahead. I sometimes have felt, in the way that some of these arguments have played out publicly, that the word children has not been given the prominence that it needed and deserves. In the end, the reason why we are committed to bringing young people back to school over these weeks is because of our concerns that those young people get a chance to meet their teachers again, to catch up with their classmates, to be able to prepare for the summer, and it is their interest in the end, with all the others that we have to bear in mind, that that need to, and we think do come out at the very top of our agenda.
The First Minister speaks of social partnership, but an impression many parents have got over the last month or two is that with powers split between Welsh Government, councils and schools themselves, that the teaching unions may have been too dominant an aspect of that partnership. When you, First Minister, spoke about even giving consideration to schools coming back after half term, you quickly were pressed into clarifying that that wasn't going to happen. It was said under union pressure. We then saw the Chief Medical Officer say that schools returning in the second week of August would be the best, at least in terms of virus risks. But we were then told that wasn't happening because it wasn't an attractive option to the unions. We then saw your Education Secretary announce that schools would come back this week for 4 weeks, yet almost everywhere that's not happening and it will be 3 weeks. Again, we're told because that's the position of the unions. Do you share any of that concern that the unions may have had too great an influence on what the timing and what the decisions have been, and what might be done about that?
Well, so I congratulate teachers in Wales for everything that they have done during this pandemic. We've had 450 schools open as hub schools throughout the experience, with teachers going in on the front line at the height of the pandemic and doing that every single day, working all the way through their half term at the end of May. So the big picture for me has been the enormous efforts that teachers supported by their unions have carried out here in Wales. There are contractual rights that people have, and unions are there to speak up for their members where their contracts are concerned. Social partnership is never about cosy conversations. It's never about people avoiding difficult issues. We have sat round the table together with our partners in the local education authorities and the people who represent the workforce. We have forged a way together, which means that uniquely in the United Kingdom, children in Wales are back in school today. And I think that is a very significant achievement, and I'm very glad we've been able to work with colleagues to bring it about.
Question 3, Neil Hamilton.
Question 3, Neil Hamilton.
Diolch, Llywydd. What assessment has the First Minister made of the impact of the coronavirus crisis on the Welsh economy?
Thank you, Member. Llywydd, the Welsh Government's Chief Economist, provides regular advice on the impact of the coronavirus crisis on the Welsh economy. That advice is reported monthly to the COVID core group of ministers and others, which meets every Wednesday.
I thank the First Minister for that reply. After 20 years of devolution, 22% of the people of Wales of working age are living in poverty, and the average disposable income in Wales is only 3/4 of the average in the United Kingdom. Those in poverty are more likely to be hit by the economic impacts of COVID than anybody else. The Learning and Work Institute Cymru has said recently that Wales is more exposed than many other parts of the UK to the economic impact of lockdown, and we've got the highest proportion at 18% of workers employed in industries most affected by lockdown measures. So if unemployment goes up amongst those groups, we're going to be in a very serious economic predicament in Wales. Cardiff University has shown in a paper published this week that Wales's lowest earners are 10 times more likely to have been affected by COVID-19 shutdown than those on the highest salaries. So isn't it true, First Minister, that a harsher lockdown and a longer lockdown means that Wales will go backwards, and those at the lowest levels of income in society are going to be the ones who suffer most? So considering that the economic effects of the lockdown will hit the poorest hardest, how do you justify keeping Wales in lockdown whilst the rest of the United Kingdom opens up?
Well, so while I don't disagree with some of the member's diagnosis, I very much disagree with his description of the recipe. So he is right to say that coronavirus has a disproportionate impact on some members of our society and those most disadvantaged to begin with feel the impact of this disease most significantly. The best way to help them is to make sure that the Welsh economy has a smooth and reliable recovery from coronavirus. That we don't have a recovery in which we open up too much too soon and then see the clampdown being needed again, so the economy goes into reverse. So he offers us a sort of Texas approach to coronavirus, in which you lift the lockdown rapidly, you let all sorts of things resume again because you think that's right for the economy, and lo and behold, the virus is off circulating again everywhere, and you have to clamp down all over again. That is what we are avoiding here in Wales in the way that we are doing things. We are reopening our economy. We are doing it step by step. We are monitoring it as we go. We are doing our best to make sure that we can have confidence in our economy, that we will not find ourselves in a position of having to put all that into reverse, because nothing could be worse for the economy or for those people who rely on it.
Russell George.
George Llywyd. First Minister, last week the UK government introduced the Business and Planning Bill in Parliament, which included a set of urgent measures to help businesses adjust to new ways of working to respond to the current pandemic. The hospitality industry in Wales have said that it needs a clear roadmap for reopening and government support to get back on its feet. So I think it certainly will be important that in the short term, any obstacles are removed that could get in the way, including easing restrictions in the planning and licensing system in particular. As I understand it, the planning bill has a mix of measures, both reserved and devolved areas. How is the Welsh Government going to respond to the devolved areas, and how is any legislation in particular going to support the hospitality sector?
Well, we've been in very active discussions with the hospitality sector over the last week and a half, looking for ways in which we might be able to reopen outdoor hospitality here in Wales with the necessary mitigating measures. And I'm grateful to the sector for all the ideas that they have contributed, for the work that they are doing with us to draw up guidance for the sector, in the hope that we will be able to do that alongside them. It has to be done in a way that puts the health of the public first. And that's what we are working on, and taking advice from our Chief Medical Officer, of course, in the process. The legislation in the House of Commons is, as Russell George said, a mixture of devolved and non-devolved. On the non-devolved side, it will passport licenses that public houses, for example, have to serve alcohol indoors. Will passport that to allow them to serve it outdoors. Other aspects will fall to legislation that is in the hands of the Senedd, and we will think carefully about what we need to do there. So, for example, to give the member an idea of the complexity, which I'm sure he is alert to in any case, many cafes and restaurants may look to be able to operate outside on the pavement in front of their properties. We have to balance that with the rights of other users, disabled people, wheelchair users, people who are partially sighted, who rely on being able to use pavements in a way that are unimpeded and don't cause difficulties to them. So there is more than one interest to think of, and the way that we will do it in Wales will be to work with the sector to find a proper balance between those things, so we can do the things that are necessary to allow that sector to open up again, but we don't do it at the expense of rights that others have to lead their lives in ways which allow them to go about their lawful business unimpeded.
David Rees.
First Minister, Jack Sargent has already highlighted the crisis in the aviation sector, which is a major sector within the Welsh economy. But another sector in the Welsh economy is the steel industry, which is also facing very serious challenges. Now, last week, the UK government seemed to have briefed the Financial Times that a request for funding from Tata would be approved. but the UK government has yet to actually announce any such approval, and as such, the industry doesn't know where it stands. Steelworkers and their families deserve better, they deserve certainty. Will you continue to pressurise the UK government to actually approve this request for funding? Because the customers from steel have basically disappeared because of the coronavirus. We need the industry to keep on going. It is critical to the Welsh economy, and we need that support from the UK government.
So I completely agree with David Rees. I read that extended article in the Financial Times, which was clearly briefed by Whitehall sources, and it very directly implied that we were just about to get an announcement from the UK government of dedicated support for the steel industry. It's an industry which this country will need when coronavirus is over, and the scale of support that is needed for that industry has to come from the UK government. We continue to play our part with Tata directly in supporting skills and apprenticeships, and with some localized environmental investment to assist the company. But the scale of support that the industry needs in a global crisis has to come from the UK government. Having indicated that that help was just on its way, it's very disappointing that it hasn't materialized now for several days. The Chancellor is to make his announcement on support for the economy next week. We will be pressing the UK government all the way through to make sure that support for the steel industry, a strategically important industry for the whole of the United Kingdom, is at the forefront of his thoughts in putting that package together.
Question 4, John Griffis.
Question 4, John Griffis.
Diolch, Llywydd. How will the Welsh Government use infrastructure projects to reinvigorate the Welsh economy in light of COVID-19?
Thank John Griffis for that, Llywydd. The Welsh Government will use all opportunities, from small and local infrastructure projects to major national investments, to create jobs and to rebuild our economy through the pursuit of economic, social and environmental justice.
First Minister, we know the pandemic has disproportionately affected the most vulnerable in our society, reinforcing existing inequalities of class, ethnicity, disability and gender. We now face an economic crisis and the prospect of further inequality and harm to those least able to withstand it. Infrastructure projects will be an important part of regenerating our economy and could also be part of addressing these social justice imperatives. So will contracts include clauses, requirements and fair work provision to ensure these capital projects offer opportunities, training and jobs for those most in need, and help build back better for everyone in Wales?
Well, thank John Griffis for that important set of remarks and his question. So he's right, of course, to point to the way in which the COVID crisis has had disproportionate impacts on different sectors of our society. I was very pleased last week to receive the report from Professor Emmanuel Obono on the socio-economic context of the impact of the crisis on people of Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds. And when we let contracts for our infrastructure work, we will, of course, draw on the principles of our economic contract, in which the investment that the Welsh public makes derives a benefit for the Welsh public beyond simply the jobs created. So employment levels, training, apprenticeships, wider community benefits, all of that will be at the centre of the way in which we construct those contracts, very much part of the contract that we have struck for the completion of the Heads of the Valleys Road, a major infrastructure project that we were able to move forward last week. But those principles will be applied more generally in order to make sure that those people who have been most adversely affected by the impact of coronavirus have a disproportionately greater benefit from the rebuilding of our economy.
Susie Davis.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, thank you for the response to John Griffis there. Obviously, he represents a Newport constituency where the M4 Relief Road could have been such a piece of major infrastructure. The alternatives to an M4 Relief Road, I think, are due to be presented to you shortly, and I imagine that you'll already have been given a rough indication of the cost of those alternatives. What is the range of those rough costs, and what have you done to secure any necessary Treasury support, having refused that support when, of course, you ditched the plan for the M4 Relief Road?
Well, the last part of that question is complete nonsense. Llywydd, what does the member mean? There was no offer of support that was turned down. I really think that is just absurd, and I have no idea where the member got it from. I don't have any rough costs from the Commission because I'm waiting for their report. The work on the first set of recommendations that the Commission made began earlier this week, and they are fully funded by the Welsh Government. I always said, Llywydd, that the original plan for the M4 Relief Road was costed at £1 billion, and that the Commission has first call on that in coming forward with alternative proposals so that we can deal with the very real issues there have been around Newport, but do it in a way that does not bring with it the enormous environmental disbenefits that the Relief Road would have brought.
Question 5, Hefin David.
Question 5, Hefin David.
Question 5, Hefin.
Question 5, Hefin David.
You can ask your question.
Right, okay. Will the First Minister provide an update on Welsh Government support for businesses affected by COVID-19?
Thank you, Member, for that. Our £1.7 billion worth of package of support means Welsh businesses have access to the most generous help anywhere in the United Kingdom. Over 2,700 Caerphilly-based companies alone have benefited from business rate relief. The second phase of the Economic Resilience Fund opened on Monday of this week.
Diolch, First Minister. Can I say, first of all, that it's such a relief that this is the last week we'll have this wholly unsatisfactory way of doing business, and it'll be good to be back in a hybrid model next week. And I thank the Llywydd for helping with that decision. Many businesses and charitable organisations in Caerphilly have been supported by Welsh Government in the form of grants and rate relief, and it's helped to plug the gap left by UK Government support. I welcome the announcement last week of government support for those startup firms who only began trading in 2019. Meaning that they would have missed out on the UK government's self-employment income support scheme. But I am aware of some small businesses in particular who are continuing to miss out. I was contacted by a constituent who runs a hairdresser's in Bargoed. Her business is unable to receive any support because she's a sole trader and doesn't have to be VAT registered, which she isn't. This is unfair as similar businesses who are limited companies don't have to be VAT registered, nor can she claim any form of rate relief as she's only a tenant at her premises. As a result, she can no longer afford to pay her staff or her overheads. What more can the First Minister and the Welsh Government do to support her and other small businesses like hers who are rooted in our valleys communities?
Well, so I thank Hefin David what he said about the new £5 million grant supporting startup businesses. We anticipate it will support up to 2,000 businesses in Wales, and it is an example of filling a gap in the schemes that the UK government has devised. I always take this opportunity to recognise the help that the UK government has provided and to say that it is inevitable in very large, very rapidly constructed schemes there will be some blunt edges and gaps that will emerge, and our £500 million Economic Resilience Fund has always been aimed at finding the gaps in the schemes that the UK government has put in place and then to try to fill them here in Wales. We aren't able to fill every gap and it's just not possible within the scope of what we have, but we continue to review the Economic Resilience Fund to see whether we can do more through it, and where there are examples where the structure of the help that is available creates gaps that firms fall through, then we're always open to hearing about that and to see if there are further ways in which we can assist.
Leanne Wood. You need to unmute yourself, Leanne Wood.
Okay, sorry, I thought I had. I want to ask about support for the arts. The arts are vitally important for our culture, for our language, potentially for tourism as well. And many people working in the arts are freelancers or gig economy workers who may or probably haven't had any support from the government so far. Large audience events are unlikely to be safe for people in the old way soon. And so what happens to the firm of public address system operators, that 4 of them that work in my constituency who are unable to have any work at the moment? Would you be prepared to consider an idea that has been proposed to the Scottish Government for a national arts force, which would see the arts be part of well-being and recovery, where musicians, artists can go into schools, hospitals, care homes, and even provide online courses? Imagine the PA firm being able to teach engineering skills, sound engineering skills, to young people in the Rhondda throughout the summer holidays. Would you be prepared to look at that recommendation that has gone to the Scottish Government and consider a similar scheme to operate in Wales? We can't rely on the Westminster Government to plug this gap. I think it's something the Welsh Government needs to do, and it needs to do it urgently.
So we thank Leanne Wood for that. You'll know that my colleague David Ellis-Thomas has published a lengthy written statement this week on support for the arts here in Wales. I'm very happy to look at the idea that Leanne Wood has set out. She's sounding quite like Frank Delano Roosevelt in that, and a great deal more convincingly than others who have made claims to that mantle, if I may say so. So we will by all means look at it. This is another example, actually, Llywyd, of where the UK government has constantly implied that it is on the brink of publishing a support package for a sector, just as it did for steel last week. So for many weeks, it has trailed an imminent announcement about a package of support for the arts. That support package needs to come forward, and if it did, it would materially strengthen our ability to put into practice the sort of scheme that Leanne Wood has talked about this morning.
Question 6, Mandy Jones.
Question 6, Mandy Jones.
Diolch, Llywyd. What assessment has the First Minister made of the effect of lockdown on educational attainment in North Wales?
So with no research of which I am aware suggests that the effect of lockdown on education attainment has varied by geography. Our focus has been on vulnerable or disadvantaged learners wherever they live in Wales.
Thank you. First Minister, a major study of homeschooling during lockdown by University College London's Institute of Education has highlighted some worrying findings about how children's education in Wales may be suffering. They suggest that on your watch, children in Wales are doing less schoolwork and receiving less online education than their peers across the rest of the UK, while schools have been shut down. Will your government commission an inquiry to look at why and how children in Wales appear to have been let down so badly by those entrusted with their education?
Well, I certainly wouldn't be prepared to do that on the back of one study, which I've not myself had any opportunity to look at. I think there have been some outstanding examples in schools across Wales of the way in which teachers have been able to respond to the challenges of coronavirus and providing an education in the context that it has created. What we are now determined to do is to create a set of national expectations that mean that all schools in Wales in the autumn are able to draw on the experience of the very best, to make sure that there is minimum attendance standards in school, standards of frequency of contact when not in school, quality of work assessment, marking and feedback standards are common across the whole of Wales. We will deploy ESTIN inspectors from September to make sure that good practice is spread throughout the educational system in Wales, to make sure that the very best, which has been, I think, outstanding where it has been on offer, is on offer more broadly to all children in Wales.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog. Yr eitem nesaf.
Thank you.